All right, folks. So as folks keep coming in and signing in, I will go ahead and get our program started just because we have an amazing panel today and we are pressed for time. I am just very grateful for all of you that are here today. So this event is being held in a hybrid format. I just wanted to inform everyone that it is being recorded. And once we have the recording, we should be able to share it with folks who request it. There are sign-in sheets on both sides. Welcome to the Social Justice Speaker Series. We are so proud to collaborate with the Social Sciences Division, our Dreamers Alliance, and our Office of Student Life. My name is Sangha Niyogi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I teach sociology and I co-direct the social justice program with my brother, Dr. Albert Ponce. I wanted to take a moment to thank our college president, Dr. Monica Chahal, as well as our division dean, Lisa Smiley Ratchford, for their courageous leadership and advocacy during these vulnerable, volatile times of attacks on our academic freedom, on our students, on democracy and basic human rights. So before we go ahead with our program, I would like to welcome our president, Dr. Monica Chahal, with a round of applause. Please come up and say a few words to us.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the faculty and the departments that have taken a lead in hosting this event. I think it's very important for us to acknowledge and to learn and to acknowledge viewpoints and have discussions that are civil and respectful and inform our perspective and help us learn about our rights and our responsibilities as residents of this wonderful country. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to the faculty who have stepped up to host the conversation and dialogue.
I'm short. So just to tell you very quickly about our social justice program, many of you have attended speaker series with us before, so we not only have this amazing speaker series, again, sometimes I have to pinch myself to remember how lucky we are here to be able to do this in this moment. And we are also a transferable degree program. By the way, my dean just walked in, and I want to say I thanked you, Lisa. No, she has been incredible. And so we also offer transferable degree programs in social justice. We are an interdisciplinary program, and we have community engagement at the heart of this program. If anyone's interested, you can approach me or Dr. Ponce, email us, come to our office hours, and we'll tell you more about how to major in social justice or how to double major alongside the major you already have. I want to also let folks know that we have the League of Women Voters right outside who are registering folks. We are, again, honored to be partnering with them. They had an event last week as well in the DVC Commons. You might have seen them. We have an amazing panel for today, so I'm going to keep my comments brief. I'm going to request that each panelist try and keep it under 10 minutes, and I should hold myself to that as well. The social justice program believes that social justice education confronts systemic, structural, and historical forms of oppression and centers on counter-narratives by historically marginalized and underrepresented groups. We are here today to remind you that the Constitution is not self-enforcing. Its principles must be activated and implemented by all branches of government and civil society. Without deliberate and sustained action, constitutional commitments to social justice remain aspirational, limited by political and institutional barriers. For much of US history, the Constitution has not fully protected the most vulnerable. Enslaved people, women, LGBTQ individuals, and other marginalized communities often face systemic exclusion from legal protections. Many of the rights we take for granted today were won through struggle, activism, and reinterpretation of constitutional principles. This reality reflects that those constitutional principles require active interpretation and enforcement by courts, legislative action, to have any real impact on people's daily lives. For marginalized communities, this is a slow and contested process that has historically included flawed interpretations and outright exclusion. The Trump administration underscored how fragile those hard-won protections remain. So our panel will cover different aspects of the crisis we are in. And as I said, we all have very little time, so this is by no means comprehensive, but we're just going to touch on some of the urgent issues that we are facing today. And in my part, I wanted to especially highlight the attacks on reproductive justice, on LGBTQ rights. For women, the rollback of reproductive health care access and the narrowing of Title IX protections for survivors of sexual harassment and assault directly affected equality and autonomy. By the way, if you don't know who your Title IX officer here is, it's our VP of Equity and Student Services. Also get in touch with us if you need more information on that. These policies touch the Due Process Clause, which has long been linked to questions of privacy and personal freedom. So now we're going even more beyond reproductive justice. So you'll notice here that the DOJ argued civil rights laws did not cover sexual orientation or gender identity. In a notable exception to the conservative shift, the Supreme Court, in the Bostock versus Clayton County decision, held that under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity is a form of discrimination because of sex and is therefore illegal. We must uphold and strengthen laws like this through collective action. For LGBTQ people, and especially transgender Americans, the administration's policies were often exclusionary. The transgender military ban blocked most trans people from serving openly. The Department of Health and Human Services has redefined sex in civil rights law to mean only male or female at birth, effectively erasing protections for trans individuals in healthcare, education, housing. Schools were told they could deny transgender students access to bathrooms matching their gender identity, undermining their right to equal treatment. And always notice how folks try to divide us. Women don't need protection from trans individuals. We have a lot more to worry about, okay? So always notice how divisive these policies are. And finally, I know I have, again, limited time today, but I wanted to highlight the constitutional tensions that have always existed. The First Amendment was invoked to expand religious exemptions, which sometimes allowed institutions to deny care or services to LGBTQ people. And that has raised a constitutional tension. Does one group's religious freedom outweigh another's right to equal protection? And I want to assert that equality and liberty are both core principles in our country. And without both of them, we're lost. It's a mistake to pit religion against rights. I don't believe that's the right framing. Many people of faith support social justice and equality and might be compelled to do so from a place of faith. And I'll just, before I turn it over to my brother, Dr. Albert Ponce, I'll just say together we can create a world where everyone is recognized, respected, and free to live authentically. Social justice, however, is not automatic. It requires active engagement, civic participation, and solidarity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Albert. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to, so I'm going to be quick, and I'm just honored to be in this space with all our students, our president, my dean, and just everyone. So it's an honor to come in and lead these discussions here and facilitate this process. So as we're honoring the Constitution Day, and one argument that I make every year is the Constitution has always been in crisis for those that it was never intended to include. That was intentional. So when the crisis that we have in our title is more for us to think about how crisis creates opportunities, and opportunities for an executive to usurp its power for itself. How does that happen? My task is, as a professor of political science, then talking about social justice, is on the separation of checks and balances, the separation of powers, how the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive ought to function in a society that is based on fairness, on rule of law, or natural law, as Locke says. So the Constitution for Native, Black, Brown, Asian populations in the United States has always been used on the flip side, not to produce equality, but to target these racialized populations over time at specific moments. So how did the centralization begin? How does the executive do what they do now? So we don't have to go that far back in the Trump versus U.S. case in April of 2024, where the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the United States that ought to review every law and determine its constitutionality based on natural law, supposed to determine right and wrong in an objective sense. But in this ruling, they gave a sitting president immunity for anything done as in official office. So that's a very broad scope of legal protection for the executive to do what they can. And this is the ground before even the election in the fall of 2024. So judicial compliance, the judiciary at the highest level, we're looking at the Supreme Court, which is using what is known as the shadow docket to give the executive the power over everything and the protections for the executive orders that the president utilizes, circumventing the legislative process. So the executive order, as we learned in our classes, is the authority of the president to write a directive, a policy memo that circumvents the legislative process and to enact something. This president has used that power 202 times, and we are now on, what's the date today? September 22. So from January to September 22, 202. That may sound like a lot. It is a lot. But we've had higher precedents. Somebody like Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1942 used 290 executive orders. Granted, we know what was happening in 1942, World War II. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt also utilized his information about racial society to use the Constitution and that power to target Asian populations and put them in concentration camps, many of them here in California, some of the largest in Manzanar. So the authority of the Constitution for populations who it was never intended for is here with us today. And that's the case study where I want to really talk about how the Supreme Court keeps ruling. It's at war with itself in the judiciary. And I wanted to highlight this image because we know through the 12th and the 13th appellate federal court districts, this administration has lost 82 cases, only won 5. We move to the Court of Appeals. The administration has lost 15 cases, only won 7. But once they urge the Supreme Court, hear this emergency case, the Supreme Court does, because ideologically, 3 of these sitting Supreme Court justices were nominated during the first term from 2016 to 2020. Once they get to the Supreme Court, the administration wins 15 out of 16 times. That's a pretty good record, especially if you're an NFL fan, right? You go 15-1 or 16-1, that's a good season. You might have won the Super Bowl. So the executive is winning the Super Bowl right now. And that's where we're at. So we have 9 Supreme Court justices which do not sit above any of us all, who are not the best, most capable legal minds. They were appointed there because of their loyalty, partisanship, ideological, and that's where the power, the Supreme Court, as I always argue, is the last line of defense for a white supremacist society. And that's exactly what they're doing now. The case study that I want to point to, happening here in California, where a federal court ruled you cannot racially profile brown populations in and around Los Angeles and have roving patrols pull over anybody who appears to be brown or speaking Spanish or has an accent. So at the federal court level, they stop it. But on September 8th, once it gets to the Supreme Court, through that shadow docket, the administration wins. And this is the outcome. The initial case was you cannot racial profile, victory, violation of civil rights, those who are U.S. citizens. The outcome on September 8th, you look this way, you speak this way, you dress a certain way. That's reasonable suspicion enough for me to violate you on the street. The Fourth Amendment was ratified in 1790, gives us protections against governmental illegal searches and seizures. This, for brown U.S. citizens, is no longer. And this is not hyperbolic. What I want to argue right now, as of just the 8th of this month, brown populations across the entire country are suspect, regardless if you're indigenous, part of the Navajo Nation, part of the Tohono O'odham at the border, you are suspect. And the state, constitutionally speaking, has all the protections it needs to detain you and question you. Maybe let you on your way if you have your passport in your pocket, but if you don't, you might be sent out of the country to Uganda, El Salvador, or anywhere else where these systems are profiting. So what we learned, this period of de jure, meaning discrimination by law and policy, ended in 1954 with the overturning of the Plessy v. Ferguson case, which established Jim Crow in the United States, separate but equal. Well, it's back. It's back, encoded and protected by the Constitution. So now we're living in this age of American apartheid for specific racialized populations, where anyone, is where knowing your rights, being empowered in these spaces, having these conversations, having that pocket constitution, carrying it with you, you'll be able to push back against those officers, those agents of the state who now no longer, by California state law, cannot be masked up on the streets and come and kidnap our populations. But this issue, when we had 3 dissenters, the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, we should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work in a low-wage job. So the race and class dimensions in this dissension, we had the opposite concurring opinion by Justice Kavanaugh, because there was no explanation needed on shadow docket decisions. But Kavanaugh gave us some thinking into, he's saying it is necessary, a condition for agents to look at people to do their job, to approach them. So I just want to leave us and hand it off to our next speaker, who's probably got the biggest task of the night, because this is moving at warp speed on the elimination of voices and freedom of speech. But I want to leave us with the idea that moving towards that Jim Crow era, we all learned about Jim Crow, right, in high school. We know how that was, separate rights and realities for different populations based on their race. Well, we are back to that. And how much are we willing to accept as a society where our neighbors, where our doctors, or anyone who appears different, who speaks different, will be a target? So thank you all. And we want to move quickly because we want to hear from you all and have a discussion. Thank you, Nam. Welcome. Bring up Professor Michael Levitin, who's the chair of journalism, talk about the First Amendment.
Do what Professor Ponce did and take this off. Try to keep it at a good distance. Hello, everybody. I'm not sure I belong here because there haven't been any stories in the media lately about free press or the state of free speech, have there? Might be the wrong event. I'm trying to bring some levity to things. There's been a lot in the news. As Professor Ponce said, it's moving at warp speed. I'm a journalist, a lifelong journalist, been one for about a quarter of a century. Now I teach it here and advise the newspaper, The Inquirer, at DVC. I hope some of you consider going into journalism. It is a noble and exciting profession and getting more so by the hour. And I see some of my students in here right now, probably reporting on the event. We are in a state, as the title of the talk goes, of crisis. Don't want to be alarmist, but most of you are quite younger, and to you, life is moving as it should as you're going through. You get out of high school, you go to college. For those of us who are half a century old, 49 right here, I know some of my colleagues at DVC are even older. And I don't think any one of us actually would say that it's ever looked as threatening or ominous or quite uncertain in our lifetimes, and probably in our parents' lifetimes too. I think if you go back any time after the end of the Second World War, things haven't looked this tough. And you guys are just coming in, and welcome. You don't choose the times you live in. As the Chinese proverb says, may you live in interesting times. And you guys found those. And it's time to learn all you can and equip yourself, and that's why we're at school, to educate and arm ourselves with information and knowledge and power to go out and tackle the crises. So what I want to talk about today, as Professor Ponce said, is primarily the First Amendment. We would not live in the country we are in. We would not be considered Americans. We would not call ourselves Americans with the rights, freedoms, and the great opportunity and possibility and really expansive sort of sky is the limit mentality that Americans have always had without the First Amendment of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It is 45 words long, which is why I feel I have the ability and the duty to read it right here. And I'm really glad, thank you, for passing out the Constitution. Everyone, just got to say, a lot of journalists I know, I went to school and studied journalism, they always told us, it doesn't hurt to keep a little copy of the Constitution in your back pocket. As Ponce said, you never know when you might need it, especially in this day and age. You never know when you might have to read that First Amendment to someone who actually thinks they have a right to arrest you on the street for either reporting or simply assembling. Because the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, 238 years old, last week, just had the anniversary, it reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, freedom of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Those are the four principles in that First Amendment. And basically, they establish the entire framework in which our free society has been able to operate. You have a right to criticize power. In fact, journalists have a duty to hold power to account. That is why we do what we do. You have a right to go into the streets when you are upset and peaceably march, sit, stand, occupy, chant, hold slogans, tell your friends to go out, post things on social media, write things in newspapers, go on TV. You can pretty much say anything in this country legally because that's our given right as a constitutional republic. They put that down there for a reason, so that we don't have a king who can say, I didn't like that speech, you can't say it anymore. It hurts my feelings. It criticizes me and my vision of where I want to take the country, and you can't speak anymore. They knew 250, 238 years ago, that's not the country they wanted. They ended the monarchy of England that oversaw these colonies for that reason. They wanted a constitutional, and when a woman asked Benjamin Franklin at the end of the Constitutional Convention, she said, well, Mr. Franklin, is this a monarchy or is this a republic? And he said, very famously, as many of your students can probably already quote, he said, it is a republic if you can keep it. And here we are. And here we are. We are at a moment very, I like to say, somewhat rather hanging by a delicate thread at this moment. And what we do, what you do as 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds, the people who are going to take and steward the next chapter of the country, not only in your area, but you're going to go on and be in different places. What we decide to do right now in these next few years will say a lot about where we are going. And that is why I am so committed as a journalist and as a teacher to teaching as many people as possible to become communicators and educators using the pen as the sword. That is the form of your power. It is the way you can express yourself on the page, and that cannot be censored, not in this country. Anyone who has been abroad or looked at the way other countries operate, just as a comparison, would know when you look at places like Russia or China or Iran or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Brazil or Mexico, journalists are routinely gunned down, they're routinely tortured, they're routinely put in jail, or simply silenced, or their families are threatened. You've seen how many Mexican journalists have died reporting on the cartel war. They die by the scores. How many in the Philippines who criticized the president? How many in Russia who dared to call out the oligarchs? And in countries, and in Saudi Arabia, in countries across the world, it is perilous to be a journalist in many places, which makes the courage of being one that much more relevant, that much more present. Here we have the honor, we have the privilege that we get to do this until now, and it's still going, and I don't think we're any closer to dissolving this Constitution, despite the fact that the President of the United States appears, and by many people's accounts, seems to have never read it. I think that we still are abiding by this, and we will continue to speak and write and act on the principles that no one is above the law, even if they claim to be. I just want to say, to go back to our current moment, you know, it was half of many of your lifetime ago. It was only 2015. For many of you, you were barely 10 years old. When Donald J. Trump rode down that escalator and announced his first presidency in 2015, he did so attacking immigrants, as we all remember. It's all in the press. But one of the first things he did in that initial candidacy, when he launched his first presidential campaign, one of the first groups he attacked very clearly, very vocally, was the free press. Anyone remember the wonderful 4-word title he gave us, which stuck in all of our minds very clearly and will never go away, and crystallized the kind of moment and the kind of a battle, in a sense, that we're in for the Constitution? He called journalists and the free press the enemy of the people. Not the guardians, not those who hold power to account. We were the enemy, literally. those who have the First Amendment right of free speech to write freely, we are now suddenly, because we're exposing stories that may not be convenient and may not be lauding praise on his transformative vision for America, we were the enemy. We were also, of course, rebranded. I say we, speaking on behalf of the entire media and journalism industry about which he was speaking. He called it mainstream, but basically anyone who wasn't on his side of the fence, he called it all fake news. It wasn't the news he wanted to read, it was fake. And so we got an entire era, this era that you're living in. You're in the TikTok age, you're in the Instagram age, and we're all Twitters and Facebook was the previous one, and now we're in a hyper velocity. It's turning so fast and you can't keep up. And who really knows when you go on your TikTok feed, do you really think you're getting, is everything really accurate there? Are we really getting the real news? Fair, neutral, balanced, informed, or are we getting a lot of opinion and algorithms that raise people's loud voices to the top? And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks with the killing in Utah that has now turbocharged this whole debate about speech and what is hate speech and what is allowed. And now the government thinks, after an era of being free speech warriors, and I hope you all kind of remember where we're coming from, Elon Musk, our Silicon Valley founder of Tesla right here down the road, richest man on planet Earth, free speech warrior, and all the far right wing that said just open up speech to anyone. It doesn't matter if it's garbage, and if it's false, if it's fake, if it's people are lying, let it all out there, because it's better to have an open marketplace, and then people can decide. They can make sense for themselves. Well, we saw what happened when Facebook helped push 1 million false stories and helped shape the 2016 election, and everybody saw that, how much garbage filtered in and how much is on social media. We've seen what unrestrained free speech online has done. It's really corrupted and kind of eroded our democratic, our sensibility as people in a common community. But more than that, it's shown the hypocrisy of everyone now who says, wait a second, we were all about free speech. We were all about, let's have everybody have a fair, anyone, you got something to say, doesn't matter if it's true or false, if it's lousy, if it's angry, you can have hate speech, you can deny slavery, you can deny the Holocaust, but you're free to say it. Like, that is the American right. But now that one of the people very high up in the right has been brutally assassinated in a horrendous incident that's now kind of traumatized the nation, whatever you think about the man as a man, the event itself will have long-lasting consequences, and I think we're already seeing them, but now we're seeing a flip-flop. Wait, we don't want to see that speech. Open speech, free speech, anybody saying whatever they want about Charlie Kirk, about anybody who's deemed a friend of the president, that's not the speech they want. So now, just to open our eyes and be aware that all of a sudden this turning away from free speech, our constitutional right, and everybody, yeah, as long as we're free, to no, free speech if it's for our friends. But it doesn't work like that. Elections, we don't have democracy only when your team wins. Sometimes the Democrats win, sometimes the Republicans win. It was only in 2020 when the Democrats won by 7 million votes popularly in all the swing states, and over 80 judges throughout all the cases that Trump said were showing that there was election fraud. He still threw an insurrection that brutally murdered cops and had hundreds of criminals who he's now since pardoned. That was not saying yes to democracy. That was saying, I only believe in democracy when I win. And in this case of free speech, when you say, I only believe in free speech, when it's speech that I accept, that I feel like I can hear because it reinforces my ideas of the world, that's not the First Amendment. It doesn't work like that. It's for everybody, and it lasts longer. So as you go into this new moment, I don't want to end on a grim note. I want to end on a realistic note. Know that our free speech and our free press is under attack in a way it has not been in your lifetimes or my lifetimes, or pick any older folks at DVC, I don't care. It hasn't been under attack like this, frankly, in any modern memory. There are lawsuits against every organization, the big ones, against CBS. They just paid $16 million to settle their lawsuit with Trump. They don't want to be bothered. ABC, $16 million also. There is harassment and intimidation and trying to coerce journalists to quiet themselves. Even when it's not even actual defamation or libelous, they wouldn't win these lawsuits. Trump wouldn't win them. But the big, powerful corporations that all have mergers they're worried about, and it's also a part of our corporate consolidation and kind of, you know, Wall Street rules in this country problem that we have, where it's only big companies worried about money, not about actually telling the truth as media organizations. That's a separate issue, but related. CBS, ABC, Trump has now sued the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion for having actually dared to publish a picture that he drew and signed of him for Jeffrey Epstein's birthday. Really obvious, everyone can see it, and the guy thinks he's going to get $10 billion out of Fox News, which is the company, after all, that elevated him to the presidency. He was great buddies with Fox News, now he isn't. So all these cases show that he's going after the press, and the people in power are going after the press. But the truth is, the press will not go away, and it also won't back down. And so if any of you are thinking, what's a meaningful thing that I want to do with my life? Do you want to tell stories that matter? Do you want to elevate people's voices who don't have a voice? Do you want to hold power to account and look for places where corruption and underhand dealings and lies and people who need to, where the truth needs to come out, honesty, and simply telling stories to inform and educate and engage and inspire your fellow citizens? That's what journalism is, and it's a brave profession and getting braver, as I would call it. But we need more people doing it. And I think today, if there's anything that we've learned about this moment of the threat and this incredible moment of free speech that we're in, where it's the topic du jour, as you said, I mean, it's basically, that's what we're concerned with as a country at the moment. It is that it has reawakened, hopefully, our appreciation, and it will reawaken it further, that this is what we need to be doing. We need to be telling the stories, and journalists won't be cowed. Just know that all of these threats and, oh gosh, what's gonna happen to the media? He sued the New York Times last week. They already threw that case out because it was so ridiculous. You don't win First Amendment cases very easily in this country. That's why the Constitution is a powerful creation, and that's why it will last. So know that you stand on the right side of history and of the entire notion of what it is to be a freedom-loving American when you defend the actual book and the principles that were laid out here. So I hope people take away from this Constitution Day that your voice matters, your information matters, and it's all in your hands, truly. So thank you. And next,
So now we're going to bring up, thank you to Professor Levitin. So now we're going to welcome Dr. Kamara Taylor, who's next, and we'll take on, do you have the slide? You ready to go? I don't need a slide. All right, here we go. Let's hear it for Dr. Kamara Taylor in our psychology department.
Hey, I'm gonna put this right here. Good afternoon. Wow, everyone looks so heavy in here. It's Constitution Day, we should be happy. A celebration, right? I'm actually going to, first off, thank you guys, my fellow esteemed colleagues, for inviting me, the president, my dean, Lisa, where she's at. I'm just saying that so I can have a job later, guys. I'm thinking I'm in advance, all right? I'm really gonna look at the, I guess we're doing this, okay. I'm gonna look at it from the psychological impact of a failed democracy today, right? And the dismantling of we the people. If we could just take a minute to pause and reflect on the psychological consequences of democracy, right? Democracy is not simply a political structure. I know we've been talking a lot about the First Amendment, you know, about the dismantling of the Constitution itself. And as a political scientist and a neuropsychologist, it's very interesting to me when I was asked to speak today, and I wanted to integrate the two, right? I want to show the intersectionality of both. It's not simply a political structure, it's also a psychological anchor. The Constitution and democracy, it shapes how we see ourselves as citizens, as neighbors, as members of a collective society. So when that anchor is kind of weakened, and the emotional, mental, and social consequences of it is extremely profound. So for the sake of my time, I'm going to look at it in like 4 different sections. Why the Constitution even matters, right? Why do we celebrate the Constitution, right? The United States Constitution was never a perfect document. We know that. But it's a living one, meant to be amended, challenged, reinterpreted. So as the nation grew, we saw this. We saw ramifications and ratifications over time, such as the abolishment of slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights protections. But it not only represents legal milestones, it's psychological affirmations of dignity and humanity that's incorporated within this. So when these protections are rolled back or dismissed or dismantled, the message is clear. Some lives, some voices, some identities matter less. That message erodes trust in institutions, and it creates fear in the hearts of people, especially those in minority groups, the ostracized groups who have historically fought hardest to be recognized. So there are psychological consequences of a dismantled democracy. There's a state of fear that's happening, right? Minority groups in particular begin to live in something that's called hypervigilance, never certain whether their rights will be honored tomorrow. Fear becomes a daily companion. There is something that's called emotional unraveling that occurs. Feelings of hopelessness, despair, alienation spread. People feel unseen, unprotected, and abandoned by the very nation that we all have helped to build, even standing here today. There's something that's called identity crisis that occurs. If the promise of we the people, you all have that little Constitution book that they were giving out there for free and a couple of pens, some mints as well. If it no longer includes you, the psychological injury becomes extremely deep. It's not only a political disenfranchisement, it's also personal invalidation. So in psychological terms, democracy provides collective safety. Without it, communities fracture, anxiety rises, and trust erodes. Now you guys have been so silent, so patient in here listening to us ramble like we love to do as professors and scholars and educators, right? And I know exactly what you're thinking. Collective solutions, I think. That's what we were thinking. I'm not too for sure, right? Healing the democratic spirit. So what do we do, right? The front row is like, yeah, what do we do, right? How do we resist this unraveling? Now, I came up with a couple of solutions. I might be wrong, you know. We can recommit to education, right? We must teach the Constitution not as a static artifact, but as a living document. The Constitution Day, which we're here to honor and bring forth this knowledge, should be more than just memorizing clauses or spitting back it. It should be collective reflection on what democracy means in our time, right? We can amplify voices. Healing begins when those who have been silenced are heard. We're hearing a little bit of that today, right? Daily interactions. We heal democracy when we humanize one another. We can practice civic empathy. We can honor democracy, and to honor democracy is to honor each other, not only in law, but in our daily interactions. We can build collective resilience, support mental health, community dialogue, grassroots organizing strengthens not only individuals, but the democratic spirit itself. So, since I only got 3 minutes left on my own terms and times, why we the people matters. Constitution Day should not be a history lesson, as I said. It should be a civic ritual, a reminder that we the people is not a phrase on parchment, but a daily practice of unity. Democracy lives when we protect each other's humanity. Democracy thrives when we honor differences as strengths and we embrace it, and we come together and we collectively speak. Democracy fails when we forget that we, the people, because the Constitution starts off with that, right? I'm not making this up. I haven't taught political science in a couple of years. I'm not too for sure, right? It starts with we, the people. But it fails when we forget that we, the people, means all of us or none of us. In the end, right, the psychological impact of the democracy failure is profound, but so is the healing power of democratic renewal. Let us commit to ensuring that no community feels invisible, no voice feels disposable, and no right feels temporary. On this day, or as we celebrate or acknowledge Constitution Day and how it's been dismantled, how it's been torn down, how we can rebuild it, let us remember we the people is not an ideal of the past. It is our responsibility in the present and our legacy for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So now we're going to bring up our last speaker before we go into our discussion, who works with the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, an immigration lawyer, Erica Padilla.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear? Yeah. Okay, thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion today. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Erica Padilla. I am an immigration attorney with the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. Students, faculty, and staff can book an immigration legal consultation with me free of charge. I'm usually available Wednesday mornings here on campus. And you guys can book an appointment through the Find Your Ally website. So before I start with the presentation, let me just reiterate that the Constitution protects all people living in the United States regardless of immigration status. So we all have rights under the Constitution, but today I will focus on a few of the most important rights in the immigration context. So let's start with the First Amendment. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, of the press, of assembly, freedom to petition the U.S. government without fear of retaliation, and freedom of speech. This latter freedom gives us the right to express our views, to participate in protest, and the right to engage in different forms of political expressions. However, as it is true with all constitutional rights, these freedoms or rights are not absolute or without limitation. So a speech, regardless of citizenship or immigration status, is not protected when it violates U.S. laws related to national security or calls incitement to immediate lawless actions. But in the context of non-citizens, non-U.S. citizens, a speech can be even more restricted because Congress has broad regulatory powers and the government has been able to use the political viewpoints of non-citizens against them, something that would be impermissible against U.S. citizens. So as a result, they can deny or revoke visas, initiate deportation proceedings, and even bar the future entry into the United States. And we have seen an example of this not too long ago with non-citizen students who protested in pro-Palestinian protests. So some of these students had F1 visas, student visas, whose visas were being revoked. And some of them, even legal permanent resident students, were being placed in deportation proceedings because of their political views. So if you are not a U.S. citizen and you are or wanting to participate in a protest, what can you do to protect yourself? Well, the first thing is to think carefully about the risk of protesting and participating in protest, especially now, because you have to ask yourself whether there is a chance that you will encounter ICE, or that if the crowd gets too disruptive and or violent, and the police makes arrest and you are arrested, how is that going to impact your immigration case? Or if you don't have any immigration case pending, in the future, if you want to apply for an immigration benefit, how is that arrest going to impact that case? But if you do decide to participate and you take your phone to the protest, turn off facial and fingerprint recognition systems on your phone. This reduces the likelihood that ICE or police will access your phone's contents without your consent. Beware of your social media postings because they can be monitored and used against you. And if you encounter ICE or the police, remember your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, also known as your right to remain silent. Don't answer any questions, especially about where you were born, how you entered into the United States, where you were born, how you enter into the United States, or your citizenship or immigration status. And if you have an attorney, have that contact information readily available. And if you don't have an attorney, have your county's rapid response line. They can help you find an attorney should you need one. Also, remember your Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. A search is unreasonable when ICE lacks one of these three things: a judicial warrant, that is a warrant signed by a judge, your explicit consent, so don't give him your consent, or probable cause. And probable cause is reasonable belief based on specific facts that you have violated an immigration law, or that there's evidence, incriminating evidence will come out of the search. But this is a high standard, and is the same standard that is required for a judicial warrant. So it's not an easy standard to meet. But if ICE wants to search your belongings or your person, what should you do? You should stay calm, clearly state that you do not consent to the search, do not lie or show false documents. If possible, don't carry with you foreign government-issued IDs or passports. If you are accompanied by a person who can record the incident from a safe distance, have them do so, or take detailed notes of the encounter. Remember your right to stay silent, and don't sign anything without speaking to an attorney first. A quick note on ICE wanting to search your home. Your best defense there would be not to open the door, because if you do and ICE sees something incriminating, they may push past you and enter your home. So they need a judicial warrant. Don't open the door. Ask to see the warrant by having ICE slip it under your door or showing it to you through a window. Most of the time they have what is called an administrative warrant, which is not signed by a judge. You can ignore those. So, and if you don't know how to differentiate between both warrants, the best defense, just don't open the door. They won't be able to get inside without a judicial warrant anyways. So what about seizures? What does ICE need to legally stop you on the street? They only need reasonable suspicion that an individual being stopped has violated federal or immigration laws. So I think Dr. Ponce mentioned this, but in September 8th, the Supreme Court basically said that a combination of only 4 factors amounted to reasonable suspicion, and that is your apparent race or ethnicity, the language you speak, besides English, so the foreign language you speak, if you speak English with an accent, if you work at a specific jobs like landscaping, agriculture, or construction, and being present at a location where undocumented immigrants are known to gather. So this was an emergency order, and it applies to Southern California, but it's basically a nod, right? Like a wink to ICE, and to basically engage in racial profiling, and so it's very unfortunate. Still, ICE needs a judicial warrant or probable cause to arrest you, to make an arrest. So in any ICE encounter, remain calm, don't resist, don't run away. Remember your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Do not consent to the search. Don't sign any documents without an attorney, speaking to an attorney first. Don't give ICE any foreign government issue IDs or passports. Don't lie, don't give them false documents. Have someone document the encounter, so take video or take detailed notes. And if you have children, if something happens to you, have someone that can take care of your children and make decisions in case something happens. If you are detained by ICE, if you are arrested, remember that your Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. The Sixth Amendment says that if you're charged with a crime and cannot afford an attorney, one can be provided for you at no cost to you. But in immigration proceedings, most cases are civil. Most proceedings are civil rather than criminal. So you do have a right to an attorney. It's just at your own expense. So finally, I'll share with you this slide. This is contact information of several different counties' rapid response line where you can report the detention and seek help in finding an attorney. And then the bottom is an ICE online detainee locator website, where if your loved one or someone you know has been detained and you don't know where they are, this might tell you where they are being held. So if you have any questions, please book an appointment with me here. The consultations are free, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. Thanks.
All right, let's give everybody, all our panelists, a round of applause, and we're going to open it up for Q&A. Okay, if anybody has questions, we have a microphone on this side of the room. If you want to come up for any of our panelists, we come on up. So feel free, don't be shy to be the first one.
So when we look at the history of the First Amendment, and I'm not just talking about like a long time ago, like things like the Red Scare, but even more recent things like how the government dealt with reporters like Gary Webb or people like Julian Assange, is the First Amendment just a dead letter? Like, if you're not actually allowed to say certain things without getting arrested, then how do we actually have a First Amendment?
Want to tell people what Gary Webb, the journalist here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, Gary Webb reported that the government was involved in selling cocaine.
And then he was kind of, I think, either framed or he turned up.
I would say it was framed.
Wasn't he, yeah, then either killed or, was he the one who was killed for that? Or
He was arrested in 2004 under very mysterious circumstances and then ended up dead in prison.
Right, and then Julian Assange, for those who know his background, what year was it? It was at the start of the Iraq War when his WikiLeaks released videos that showed bombings by U.S. military killing civilians that had nothing to do. In fact, Reuters, journalists, civilians in Iraq and they release these to the world as public information. I think that what you're talking about is, yes, journalists who cover the government, especially the military, definitely have more security concerns. They have more risks in the sense that, boy, you get something wrong writing about your college president, you get a fact wrong, you get something in our newspaper or even in the San Francisco Chronicle, okay, something wrong about an organization, a president of something. You get something wrong about the military, you misreport, you can be in big trouble. And I think that they're very secure with sources. A lot of it's, you get a lot of information. You know, the Pete Hegseth, Department of Defense Secretary right now, wants to eliminate the New York Times. He made a select list: New York Times, CNN, Politico, and another major, and NPR, from the Defense Department, from the Pentagon, for precisely this. He says journalists don't have a right to get documents that aren't kind of consensually given by the government. If we haven't given them to you, you don't have a right to report them, like secret documents or like off-the-record sources who tell you something but are revealing something that isn't public information, which is ridiculous, because that's what journalists and that's what the media has done forever, looked for sources that aren't necessarily out there in the public view, but the public has a right to know it. That's what the Pentagon Papers were, releasing the information about America's involvement in Vietnam that the Pentagon was really upset about. But guess what? The New York Times published the Pentagon Papers, and they helped change the course of the war. They helped energize, get people really angry about what was really behind the scenes, and helped move that war towards its close. So what I would say is, there's great risks when you're reporting on issues like national security. I wouldn't say it's a, what'd you call it?
I called it a dead letter.
A dead letter. I mean, I think that you still go to court if you want, and Julian Assange is now free. He sure had to wait a long time in prison, but he is now released. And so I would still always say that the law, in a sense, is really behind us for most cases. And of course, bad things happen, but it's keep reporting the truth and you'll be all right for the most part.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. And also, just one thing to keep in mind is rights, do not take your rights for granted. They must always be demanded, always. If they're there sitting stable, they will be a dead letter unless you fight for them.
Hi, my name is Jet, and my questions are, how does the state only recognizing biological males and females affect intersex individuals as well? Aren't the same difficulties transgender individuals experiencing as a result of that, of males and females only be recognizing some of the same difficulties intersex individuals are now facing as well?
Yes, you are absolutely right about that, and that is going to erase them from existence. That means you have no access to healthcare, no access to other kinds of rights, right? So you're absolutely right for calling that out.
Yeah, sorry, it's because I see a lot of similarities in the way that transgender individuals can express their lives and the difficulties that transgender individuals and intersex individuals experience as well. And that not only recognizing males and females biologically totally ignores that the fact that there's multiple different sexes biologically, and not only biological females and males exist in the scientific realm.
Yes, no, definitely. And this is a great case that we think about First Amendment academic freedom also, and the directives from the executive branch. We have we can only look at higher education is under attack. We look at the case of Texas A&M, where a student was recording a professor and saying the president has issued a directive, its own male and female exist, wiping out the existence of what the professor was teaching on their specialty, on transgender and sexuality. But that student has the force of law where now that tenured professor was removed along with their deans, right? So this is, in the last week or so, we've seen over 60 academics be relieved of their jobs because of this teaching that challenges the power of the executive branch. So that's where we're at. That's the analysis. That's what's occurring. But the power that we have when we come together is to push back against this and say we exist and we demand to be seen and heard.
Thank you.
Next, come on up, folks. Any question that you'd like to add? We still have some time. Anything? Yeah, we can bring the mic to you. You don't have to get up. Just put your hand up. We'll come.
My question, oh, that's really loud, sorry. I'm Melissa. My question is more in regards to DVC's choice to fly our flags at half-mast, not in honor of the victims of 9/11, but in honor of Charlie Kirk's passing. And why, as an institution that has students who are queer, who are Black, who are brown, who are immigrants, how that now makes them feel a little bit unsafe on campus, that we would choose to honor a man who often spoke out against these demographics, who made it a point to spread hate in the guise of being a Christian and in the guise of debating his point about things, and why, when there was a county supervisor, I believe it was in Iowa, who made the choice to not fly his county's flags at half-staff, why we went ahead and made that choice and capitulated to this regime. It really bothers me as a queer student, and so I would like an answer on that.
We have our president here who can respond to that question.
Thank you for that. First of all, I lost sight of our student. I want to apologize that has been the impact. That was never intended. However, our policies state that, and our board policies, and you can look them up, they're on our website, state that we do follow presidential decree as well as the state. And so that policy states that when the president says you will fly the flag at half-staff, that is what we do. So that is what we did. What is at risk if we do not comply is the perhaps unwanted attention to our institution, and then what is the consequence of that unwanted attention on our institution? We receive federal funds in the form of federal financial aid. Would it have gone that far? I don't know. Does it draw attention that we are not complying with the presidential decree, and then does that then open up, does that provide an opportunity for eyes to be upon us in ways that we had not wanted? That could have happened, and that was not a chance that we could take. We continue to support all of our students. We continue to welcome all of our students. We will do everything within our power to ensure that you are safe and that you are provided the learning environment that you deserve. Every single person that steps foot on this campus deserves a safe learning environment, and we will continue to provide that. Within the environment that we live in right now, there are certain ways in which we've got to toe the line and be able to continue to provide for as many students as we can. And so I have no words other than to say that I am truly sorry, and that I do continue to support every single person who is on this campus. You deserve to be here. You deserve a safe environment. You deserve a welcoming environment, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to provide that.
Thank you. Thank you for the response, and thank you for the student being brave to come up and raise these questions. All of our students, we are here. This institution is here for you. This is your college. So you need to raise these, how you feel if we're not fulfilling the mission when you enter this campus. So thank you.
All right, my question pertains to the role of the Supreme Court. So throughout the history of the United States, we see the Supreme Court uphold the institutions that may be used to suppress the freedoms that we do have in this country. So we see this in the 1800s with the use of the Supreme Court to roll back Reconstruction era legislation that really brought equality. We see this with the huge case of Plessy v. Ferguson. But I see this throughout U.S. history as the Supreme Court is just an institution that upholds regression. And I see that now today. You see that with upholding of Citizens United and even the rulings today. It seems more that the latter half of the 20th century was more of a fluke than the standard. So what role going forward does the Supreme Court have? Is it just an institution that upholds regression, or is it an institution that actually upholds the Constitution?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Great question and a big question. And this just makes me think. So one thing that when I'm pointing to the Supreme Court and in my arguments that I've made is what they sustain. They are the last line of defense with this country the way it was originated. But on the flip side, it also allows for openings. And I'm thinking of one of my friends, Fred Lee at the University of Connecticut, who wrote a book on 4 extraordinary moments in U.S. constitutional history, but focused on racial politics. Right? How the Constitution actually allows. But when we're thinking of the Constitution, it points to what Dr. Taylor was discussing. Who we, the people, are symbolically, because then we, the people, materially, those who were outcast, they've mobilized. And they've forced a reconstitution of the United States without sticking to that document. We've reconstituted it when we come together, when we speak to each other, when we mobilize, and we demand. As Frederick Douglass, the former abolitionist, said, the powerful will concede nothing. History shows us never have, and they never will. We can look towards the future and predict that. They never will. It's until we come together and we make those demands, Constitution or not. So it could be both. But right now, the way that the Supreme Court is constituted, ideologically, where 3 of the Supreme Court justices were appointed by this authoritarian, and that's where we're at, a wannabe authoritarian. We're in this form of what I call, and many scholars call, fascist authoritarianism. That fascism, we mean, it is that calling for that national rebirth where one racial group primates over others, and calling for creating that crisis, right, where we're thinking of crisis. The nation has deteriorated, so we need to give it rebirth, but rebirth is rooted in that form of white Christian nationalism that was venerated and very sent out symbolically over the weekend. So it could be both. The answer, just keep asking the question. Anybody else?
Good afternoon. My question is also in reference to the recent Charlie Kirk assassination and also just the grand amount of debates about free speech and what can or can't be said, especially from President Trump recently. My question is, how exactly can something like media literacy and understanding what is facts and what is truth and what is being non-biased being spread to the public? Because people like Charlie Kirk and people like Nick Fuentes, their platforms rely very heavily on, at least from what I've heard, from misinformation, from peddling a very specific message, and in a way from almost profiting on what they're saying. So I'm trying to ask, like, what is a way for media literacy and for a better understanding of what is fact to be understood by more people?
That's a great question. I'm going to hand it off to my colleagues, but we also have our colleague, Professor Mickey Huff, with Project Censored, and critical media literacy is at the core. And you pointed to something, and I'm going to pass this off, but think of the prophet. This person died a multimillionaire. Came from nothing because he was peddling something that appealed to the masses, a certain sector of society. That says a lot about us, and I mean us as we, the people, that we have to reflect upon and discuss. So I'll pass it around. Maybe you want to come on up. Anybody want to expand on it?
Okay, I guess as the media guy, I mean that's really that's the $64 million question right there. I think everybody we are in this era of, I mean, the fake news. Trump coined the term, I guess. I think he did, but it's really, he helped create it. I mean, he really, by the ability to spout whatever you want to say and then force others to prove you wrong and force weeks of the media to kind of worry about your lies that weren't accurate, whether it was on Facebook and then it's on Twitter, it's on, and I think that the Kirk killing, I mean, look who Jimmy Kimmel just got. I mean, what Jimmy Kimmel said was not very offensive necessarily, and he got canned by one of the biggest companies in America. Yes, would you like to add? I'm sorry? Oh, has he? As of today? No kidding. Well, did that just happen while we were? Just came in. Very interesting. Well, that says something about popular demand. And yeah, that company maybe saw, tens of millions of people are going to boycott them. Yeah, interesting. Point being, we're in this information, it's a cyclone. And I think everyone's been totally thrown off of kilter. You know, back in our parents' generation, our grandparents, the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were like 3 stations, right, on TV. There was ABC, NBC, CBS. There were a few news outlets. And the few people who did report the news, you may think a lot of it was, yeah, whitewashing or ignoring the racial, tensions, all sorts of things they should have been reporting. But at least there was a consensus that when they reported things on the news, it was assumed to have happened and that they weren't lying to you. And we had our great journalists like Walter Cronkite and famous ones who you could be believed. And when something showed up in the New York Times, you may not love it. It may be too liberal for you. It may be too much of this and that. The gray lady, as they called it, really the establishment. Once it's in the New York Times, it probably was already news a while ago, but now it's official news in America, the paper of record. But at least it was believable. And the beauty of our profession, and anyone studying journalism, I hope, if you're still left in the room, but I hope other people I hope you're intrigued by this talk. We need more of you. The beauty of it is that we're committed to honesty. Without your integrity, you are nothing in journalism. You fabricate something, you make up some person's quote, you tweak something, you intentionally lie, you put in facts that are untrue. If you make a mistake, okay, you can issue a correction later. Everyone makes mistakes. But the idea that we now have a decade of lie-spewing social media and everyone in the world, and it happens in other countries, and they burn down, I mean, whole revolutions can occur because lies have been spurred in the media and social media have spread them, and it's a crisis. And now we're at a real moment of inflection, I guess, is what people are saying. But I think that we need the critical media literacy, as you said. Mickey Huff has been a longtime advocate of this. He's our former chair. And we need to actually incorporate, I think that's a great call because we've been talking with our Dean of Social Sciences. We need to make critical media literacy more of probably many disciplines because everyone needs to learn how to really read and process and know that what you're reading isn't some gibberish that happened to be shared 2 million times by other people who thought it was a cute idea, but is real news. And I think that this is a really dangerous moment you're bringing up, the Kirk killing, in terms of what it's going to mean for what people are sharing on what happened. And even in the aftermath of the killing, we saw all the news that's thrown around the internet no one really knows, but it's going to continue. And that's a very important critical media literacy. Please, yeah, continue. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, but it was another thing in regards to the Supreme Court. Like the graph, looking at that graph reminded me that a while ago this year there was a ruling related to, I think the court had ruled on like other courts' abilities to block like things related to executive orders or something like, and I was a bit confused about that because I didn't know whether that will also affect like other parts of the circuit or like at the federal level if federal courts can still rule on executive orders, or if that means that we will see more and more things just go straight to the Supreme Court, because I wasn't sure what that meant.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And what referring to is the case that took away some of the power that the federal district courts had to have an injunction on a particular executive order. But they still left the power where the people can bring a class action suit, so which is kind of broadly construed in legal terms. You can still stop an executive order, but it's at one step. But they did stop where the judge can take it upon themselves to issue an injunction like immediately. But there's still avenues. But the administration, and this is what, thinking in the big picture, when we're talking about authoritarianism or fascism, these are, the media is attacked. The university is attacked. Students are to be silenced. The courts are to be overturned. And in the first, when we were looking at the Supreme Court, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was hanging on there and people were telling her, please leave the court so somebody can take your place, we knew that was going to be dangerous for generation. Because now you have full power, 6-3. 6-3. So how can you challenge that? And that's the people, where we have to reconstitute it. Great question.
Thank you.
So just two things. One of the ways that you can tell whether something is true or not true is there anything at stake? So if I'm a journalist and I say something that's a lie, I might lose my job. If I'm just giving you my opinion, there's no consequences. So that's one way that you can tell the difference. But what I also wanted to talk or ask about was Prop 50, the fact that it's on the ballot, and I was wondering if any of the panelists would like to address what that is concerning, because the vote is November the 4th.
Yes, bringing it home to California. Proposition 50, and anybody else want to jump in? Kamar, you want to talk about anybody? Want to talk about Prop 50? I don't want to consolidate the mic, but Prop 50 is generally the idea to, and we're looking at it from a power perspective. All politics are power. That's what's happening it's a response to what happened in Texas. And Texas wiping away 5 Democratic strongholds in the congressional map out of 435 at the lower house. We know these institutions are I'm looking at the clock, we have like 2 minutes, bear with me. But Prop 50 is that special election coming up soon to give the legislature back the power, which is controlled by Democrats, the power to redraw the map. Because a while back, over a decade ago, we said it would be fair, actually, we created a citizens commission where we draw out the map, no partisanship. Sounded good in theory, but when people are playing ball and you want to play and you want to win, you have to counter. That's how power works. And we're having an event before the election on this particular issue. So we have, do you have a question? Or?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so we'll take this last question. I just want to give everybody, all our panelists, a big round of applause. Our president for coming in and taking questions, our dean, everybody who attended, students. And we'll close out with, okay, we have 2. Okay, can we get, since you already asked,
go ahead.
go ahead, and then we'll come back to you. Just trying to give everybody the opportunity.
Sorry, trying to be careful about this microphone. So one of the speakers noted that the fact that the original Constitution did not consider the rights of anyone other than cisgender, heterosexual, white landowning men. Another one encouraged us to take pride in the amendments that have made a more equal society, that we liberated most of our slaves, that we have given most of our adult citizens the right to vote, etc. But it's only most. That we still have slaves, that we still deny citizens the right to vote through our penal system. And we also still don't have an equal rights amendment to guarantee women equal rights to men, or any proposed amendments to protect transgender, non-binary, intersex people, etc. I wonder if one of the panelists would comment on at what point do we consider following the lead of the French and writing a new constitution?
I want to follow the French. Yeah, yeah. I think that comes along with remembering, and I'm going to keep saying this because I truly mean it from my heart. That when the Constitution was wrote, I don't think so. I mean, George Washington he wore a good wig. He could be my grandparent, but I'm not too for sure, right? But I'm pretty for sure a lot of us and our ideologies was not included in that Constitution, right? But what was included was the fact that it said we the people, right? And I think what has truly happened is that we have forgotten our democratic power of being a people that we choose to elect and vote who we want in office. And we can come together to ratify or reconstruct some of those things. But somehow it's become flipped, and I don't know if it's because of capitalism. I don't know if it's because of just the lucidness of power that we have now it's just shift and change. We no longer feel like we have power as a people, right? We have allowed politicians to determine what we do in our communities, whether it's local, state, whether it's federal, but I think if we really, really get back to the framework of we the people and see how much power it is collectively when we come together and not be isolated, I think we can do things like change, right? But until we recognize that, and I think that it's because a lot of it is divide and conquer out of fear, right? And because we fear, we're saying like, oh, that doesn't concern me. That's them versus us, right? And as long as that mentality happens, then we won't be able to change, that document, right? But you have to look, that document has been ratified so many times. But was it ratified for the sake, it was because people, they gathered and they recognized that those the people, right? That we can cause change to happen. But I think we kind of like are lessening that and like, oh, those politicians, they have the power. No, I think it's if we come together in inverse that we can see that happen. Maybe I'm just hopeful.
I think that's all we have time for, folks. But I think the point we made is that this is a live document. None of our rights can be taken for granted, and we all have to come together to keep working on this and continuing the conversation, continuing to organize on the ground. So with that, we will close off today, and we'll hang out here if folks want to chat with us more. But it was wonderful to see you all, and let's keep doing it. See ya.
Another constitutional convention.